Hello everyone. Today I'm going to discuss Thaddeus Russell's appearance on Joe Rogan. I think it's his latest appearance, but it's from a while ago. Thaddeus Russell is a postmodernist and the host of the Unregistered podcast. What's great about Thaddeus is that he thinks like everyone else, only he knows his intellectual foundations in explicit terms, which makes him a delight to criticize, which is what I am going to do right now.
Is there a part of the world where people are generally thought to be dumb?
Yeah, Africa, the country, the continent we've been talking about. That's the history of this country. This is the history of Europe. That's the history of the modern world, is the belief that people from Africa are dumber than whites.
Well, isn't the problem with that Africa is also where the pyramids were created?
What justified slavery. That's what justified colonialism. That's what has justified all sorts of things, right? So that's the problem here, is that these attempts to define people by race and, by the way, by gender have done nothing but terrible things. Nothing but terrible things.
No, they haven't. Now, they have a very limited use because there's not a hell of a lot you learn from the fact that somebody is a specific race. You learn a lot more from knowing someone's sex, but that doesn't mean these are invalid concepts. Grouping people together based on race is legitimate, if only marginally useful, but we will see that Thaddeus objects to the objectivity of any classificatory scheme, and so he can't conceive of a classification that is only a little bit useful. Why would you make something like that? For him, it's, if you're defining black people as black people, if you're putting people into the category of black people, well, that's arbitrary. All categories are arbitrary. So you must have some nefarious purpose in mind, when in reality you just say, oh, okay, this is a difference in reality, but it's not an important one. Thaddeus can't comprehend that because to him all concepts are arbitrary.
And you can't do it anyway. It's scientific bullshit. It's total superstition. It's utterly arbitrary. The lines are always being redrawn by the people who do this stuff. So why are you still doing it, guys? Like, where do you draw the goddamn line? All the people in Africa are black? Really? Egyptians are the same race as people from the Congo, as the people from South Africa, as the people from Somalia? I mean, how are they the same race? Because it's pigment, skin pigment? Is that the only determination?
No, it isn't, but this is all contextual. When all you have are your perceptions, you say, oh, these people fall within a range of skin tones and geographic areas, so we'll define them based on that. As you get more biological knowledge, you identify a deeper characteristic, but race is a legitimate concept. It's not something only a racist would come up with. Now, overemphasizing it is suspicious and almost certainly racist, but the concept itself is not racist. But Thaddeus thinks it has to be because everything is irreducibly different. So if you come up with this category, it's for some bad reason. You have some ill intent.
Well, it's a fascinating thing when you call people African Americans or call them Italian Americans, because Italy isn't actually a country, whereas Africa is a continent.
Fantastic point.
It's weird to call people continent
Americans. Who's an Italian, right?
Yeah.
Because guess what? Italy didn't even exist until the 19th century,
yeah.
Right? I mean, it was just a bunch of city-states until then, and there was no such thing as an Italian. People who lived there didn't call themselves Italian. It wasn't a concept. It wasn't a name. It was nothing. And then they made it into this nation state that they called Italy. And ever since then, every dipshit Italian American is like really proud that I'm Italian. Well, that has no meaning really in the deepest history. It has some meaning, sure, but they talk about it as if it's like rooted in nature, like it's biological.
People love it. They love being a part of that stupid team.
Yeah.
It's Sopranos.
It's
I blame the Sopranos.
It's tribalism.
Yeah.
It's tribalism.
It is tribalism.
And it's stupid. And if it were just stupid, I wouldn't care. It's that it is, as I said, it just leads to bad stuff, and it has historically.
There's a reason Italy became a state in the first place. It integrated a lot of things that were within a similar range, so there was an objective basis for Italy to come together, And even though it was just a bunch of city-states, they were similar. They were closer together to each other than they were to anything else around them. And that's how you form concepts, similarities and differences. Yes, they weren't all exactly the same, but they all were close together on a range and farther apart from everything else, so it makes sense to identify, hey, I'm part of this range. But Thaddeus doesn't approve or understand the concept, well, of concepts. He doesn't understand that concepts identify ranges. To him, everything is irreducibly different, so how are you going to group it together? He doesn't understand that concepts integrate units that fall within a range, not just things that are exactly the same.
So is this a popular opinion, the idea that there are no races?
Oh, okay. So, I'm Mr. Anti-academic, but this is where academics have actually done their best work, I think. So, and this is my second disagreement with Jordan Peterson. He thinks that all the stuff in college campuses that's crazy is because of postmodernism, and he doesn't understand postmodernism. What's going on in college campuses is people making all sorts of truth claims about things like race and gender, right? I'm black, therefore I will always be this, that, and the other thing. You're white, therefore you are this, that, and the other thing no matter what, right? Mm-hmm. That is actually old, modernist, scientific racist thinking. That's what these old racist, geneticists, eugenicists thought back in the day. It's amazing. Again, SJWs are actually really, really conservative and ultimately racist. At the bottom
Social justice warriors, folks. For people who don't know,
I thought your listeners must know that.
Some people don't know the abbreviations.
I just assumed that was a shorthand to use. So, postmodernism. This is where Jordan Peterson makes me want to throw chairs when he talks about this. Comes out of French philosophy in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. Michel Foucault is the most famous example of a French postmodernist, and they get dumped on all the time. But the central argument that was made by Foucault and postmodernists was that none of these things are biologically determined, that there is no natural essence to anything, that everything is a social construct, which means that we now are free to choose our own destiny as individuals, right? Prior to the 1960s and 70s, it was the dominant belief that if you were born a woman, you were going to be a wife and a mother. And if you weren't, you were doing something unnatural, right? That if you were black, you could never be the head of a business or the president, right? You could never do math, whatever. If you were white, you should do all those things, right? Everybody's destiny was determined at birth. And everyone believed that. Most people believed that.
Okay.
So postmodernists came along and said, guess what? You know what we found looking at history? We found just what I said. I just gave you the whole postmodern argument right there. We looked at history and we saw, first of all, that all these categories have changed over time, which tells us that they're just inventions. They're just inventions. They get reinvented all the time, okay? And second of all, they have served the purposes of ruling elites because they get to put people in their boxes and control them more easily, right? Oh, those people over there, those are black, therefore they should be our slaves. So it's okay for us to have them as slaves. Those women over there, we don't want them, working for NASA, so we will have a rule against women working for NASA, whatever it is, right? So postmodernists said, none of this is biological, none of this is inevitable. You are now free to do what you want as an individual. It was a liberating moment. It has become the dominant way of thinking in academia. And I have to say, in my view, it is the supreme achievement of academics ever.
That's it?
That's it. But it's huge, huge. So if you think about it, look how the world has changed, and particularly in the United States since then, right? We no longer generally have those ideas, or at least we don't operate as such. So black people are allowed, mostly, into places they weren't before. Women are allowed very much so into places they weren't allowed before.
Yes, such as in action movies, which is an ugly, nihilistic attempt to destroy femininity. Anyway, he is correct that social justice advocates are racist and sexist, although there's a difference between race and sex. I won't get into that now, but what he doesn't understand is that his ideas inevitably lead to that. He thinks, no, postmodernism was good. It led to total subjectivity. Nobody could put you in a group and say you have to be this way because everything's subjective. How can you say I have to be this way? But what he doesn't understand is that total subjectivity gives you no guidance. You don't know what to do if everything is just subjective. Why do anything? Why act this way rather than that way? Well, if you're going to survive, you have to act in certain ways. So you need some guidance. Well, where do people get guidance? Well, if they're bewildered and confused and they don't know what to do, they huddle together in groups and let the groups give them guidance. This is what happened in our primitive tribal past. Human beings didn't know how to use their powers of abstraction yet. They didn't know how to deal with the world. So they huddled together in tribes. Strength in numbers. Guidance in numbers. People need guidance. If you strip it all away and create this atomized subjectivity, people have absolutely no way to know what to do. Now, they could figure it out individually, but you've taken that tool away from them. They can't use reason. If they can't use reason, they have nothing to guide them, so they look to what other people are doing. Everybody looks to each other. And so then they form together, and it's like a Ouija board. Everybody tentatively moves in a direction, and there's this feedback loop of everybody thinking, well, he kind of moved in that direction, so I guess I can go this way. And so you get this ugly, but superior to total confusion process of action. Really, what Thaddeus doesn't understand is that his ideas lead to immediate death and destruction. And so they can't actually ever exist in reality. And so all you're ever going to get, if you, quote, succeed with those ideas, well, if you really succeed, you won't be around to see it because nobody will be able to survive. The only way you can exist with the consequences of his ideas is with this kind of social justice tribalism. Because his ideas are setting everybody back to zero. But zero is just non-existent. So if you set everybody back to zero, the only people who are even still going to be alive are the people who turn to these ideas he hates and sees as a betrayal of postmodernism. This is exactly the same as what happens with communism. People say, well, it's not real communism. Okay, but you can give me some formula for creating a square circle. And when I put it into practice and I don't get a square circle because square circles are impossible, you can say, well, you didn't do it the right way. Okay, but that's because it's impossible. So people can say, oh, the Soviet Union wasn't real communism. Yes, it was. Now, it wasn't the result you claimed it would be, because you were claiming a square circle. The Soviet Union was communism in the only way it can ever exist. And these social justice, racist tribalists are postmodernism in the only way it can ever exist.
Most men, when they have sex with a woman and they put sperm in their body, they can make a baby.
So that's one characteristic.
But hold on a second. You're making it as if it's a really common thing. When you're talking about like a small fraction of the men can't make babies, an incredibly small fraction.
So the
vast majority of males with the XY chromosome who have penises are capable of impregnating a female with an XX chromosome. I mean, and the male was born a male, the female was born a female.
Right.
But, so what do you mean that you aren't born a man or you aren't born a female?
Right. So there are many, many characteristics, right, that we assign to the category of man. Many of them.
Okay.
That's one characteristic. Okay. So why is that characteristic in the man category? If, in particular, that there are some men who don't share that characteristic.
But which ones don't? That's the aberration. The aberration is the ones that don't.
Why is it an aberration? See, these are all
because they can't get a woman pregnant. They don't produce sperm. You're talking about like very, very rare cases.
Yeah, for race. Same thing happens with sickle cell anemia, right? This is what everybody invokes when they want to claim that race is real. Only black people get sickle cell anemia. Well, guess what? The numbers there are about the same as the number of men who are infertile. Why then are people with sickle cell anemia definitely black? Why is that definitely a black thing? Same thing. It's, again, why are we, there's all these characteristics. Why do we draw this line called man around all those different people?
Well, why do we do it with animals? When you have a male dog and a female dog, isn't there a male dog and a female dog? You don't believe there's a male dog and a female dog?
I'm just saying it's inventions. Now, hold on. So before you get...
But it's not an invention.
Yeah, no, it is, of course.
But it's not an invention. One of them has a penis and testicles.
Yeah,
it's a male.
The thing we see, we call it a penis. Sure, I get it. No, I get it. And that's the world I live in, absolutely. So I operate in this way, by the way. So if
a dog penis world?
You and I would agree on all the things in the world that are dogs.
Right.
And all the things, okay, I'm not going to walk around and be like, oh no, Joe, that's not a dog.
So with humans, you're making a distinction that there are certain feelings and the way you interface with the world that may be more or less masculine or feminine.
No, but it does apply to dogs, my point here, which is that we did draw a line, right? In those, do all dogs look alike? My God, there's a huge variation there.
We're not talking about race, though. We're talking about gender, right?
Either way, it doesn't matter. It's
let's just
the same
say
principle.
Dobermans. Male Dobermans and female Dobermans, right? You can't, like, if you go to buy a male Doberman and the guy gives you a female Doberman, he goes, oh, but she identifies as being a male. It's just an invention, man. This is a male. But she's a male. You can't disrespect her by saying she's not a male. You would say that guy's crazy and you want your money back.
Are there any two females who are identical?
Two female what?
Anything.
I mean, if you have a really good breeder, you can get pretty goddamn close if you're talking about dogs.
No. There are no two organisms that are identical. Certainly not.
They're not identical down to the hair. No, you got me on a technicality.
And this is the naked philosophical core here. Thaddeus Russell believes there are no two things that are exactly alike. Therefore, we have no grounds, no objective grounds for grouping things together. This is called conceptual nominalism. If all of existence is just this spectrum, you just have minor gradations the whole way through nature, the whole way through existence. It is utterly arbitrary if you pick 2 points and say, I'm going to separate out anything between these 2 points and call it X. So they're talking about dogs. Okay, but dogs are only different from human beings in a quantitative way, not a qualitative way, according to him. There are certain physiological things that are similar between us and dogs. It's just a sliding scale from dogs to human beings to fish, trees, rocks, rainstorms. You can just get this whole spectrum. And yeah, you can say, for practical reasons, we can call things dogs. But there's no actual basis for that in reality. It's just convenient. And the lines are arbitrary. Now, if there were a bunch of things that were exactly the same, all dogs were exactly the same height, same color, same number of hairs, same length of hairs, then we could say, okay, this concept refers to all of these things, and we can treat them the same because they are all exactly the same. But since they're not exactly the same, we can't actually treat them the same because dogs are different. So how can we talk about them all as being the same when they're not? We can't know that any generalizations based on our concept of dog are true, because the dogs are different. So you can have a rule of thumb, but you can't know absolutely, because all dogs are irreducibly different along at least one dimension. Okay, so I hope that counts as steel-manning his case. You know, steel man is the opposite of a straw man. I want to give his case in the strongest possible terms, briefly here. I think he would agree with my presentation of what he believes. Now let me explain why that is wrong. It's wrong because you can categorize things as belonging together because they fall within a certain range. This is what I said earlier. So all dogs are closer together than any of them is to a human being. So it is true, there's a sliding spectrum, but there's such a big gap there that they all fit together as opposed to, say, human beings. And that is what we call a qualitative difference. Even though, really, quantity does have a kind of primacy over quality, epistemologically. And what is important to understand is that even though all dogs are irreducibly different, since they do fall within a range, you can predict the results of being a dog in different contexts within a range. Now, if you want to get specific, you have to choose a specific dog. But you can be general because you're treating a general category. I call Thaddeus Russell's way of thinking trajectory thinking. It's really just another name for what Ayn Rand called the anti-conceptual mentality. And I call it trajectory thinking after the example I like to use. Imagine you have a rock. Okay. You throw the rock. Now, is that rock going to land on Mars? Is it going to land in China? Is it going to land 10 miles away? No. You can say, within a relatively narrow range, where the rock is going to land. Even though you don't know specifically where it's going to land. Now, how do you know that? Because you know the nature of rocks, you know the range of things that the concept rock refers to. So if you're holding something you conceptually identify as a rock, you know the range within which it falls. You know the range of your strength, even if you don't know it exactly. You know the context of earth and gravity and wind resistance and all of that. So when you throw the rock, you can predict the range within which it will fall. Now, if you want to know exactly where it will fall, yes, you have to take account of all of these specifics. You have to mathematically calculate the trajectory of the rock based on wind resistance, specific wind resistance. Not just the range of possible wind resistances that exist on Earth, but specifically what's happening right now. You have to know what's happening with your muscles, the exact weight of the rock, etc. If you want to know specifically where that rock is going to land, you have to know all that. But you don't have to know all that to know the range within which it will fall. And this is the mistake of people like Thaddeus Russell. They think either you know exactly where that rock is going to land, or you don't know anything about it. If you don't know exactly where that rock is going to land, how do you know it's not going to land on Mars? How do you know it's not going to reach escape velocity, fly out of the atmosphere, go to Alpha Centauri? You can't say that. You just admitted you don't know where it's going to land. So how can you know that's not going to happen? Because you can know within a range even though you don't know precisely where something is. And that is a result of our capacity to conceptualize, to say, oh, I'm going to create this category that identifies things within a certain range. Therefore, I can make general inferences based on these general categories. And if I want to get specific, then I have to get into the details. But having general knowledge is extremely valuable. You don't have to do the calculation every time you throw a rock. If you're playing fetch with your dog, you don't have to worry each time, oh damn, I hope this stick doesn't fly out of the atmosphere. If you had to do that, how often would you play fetch with your dog? This is what separates human beings from the lower species. We don't know just what's in front of our eyes. That's all animals know, just what's in front of them. We know way more because we can create these general categories and know a general range of results based on those categories. That's called generalization. And that enables us to build airplanes, cars, computers, to live like human beings, like civilized human beings. To have all of the wonderful things we have. So when somebody like Thaddeus Russell says, no, we can't actually do that, he is actually attacking the foundation of everything we have. But if you understand that he's wrong, and you understand this trajectory example I'm talking about, then what you have to understand is that applies to everything. You can do this with honesty, you can do this with ethical principles, you can do it with everything, and once you understand that, the whole world opens up to you. Because you now feel confident. Well, just the same way as I don't have to worry about the rock or the stick flying to Mars, I know that honesty is the best policy. I can know in this range of contexts, honesty will always lead to better results, even if I don't know specifically what's going to happen. I know that it will lead to the best results possible. Now, in just the same way as if the context changes, the results will change, a principle only applies within a range of contexts or a range of situations that constitute the context. If you go to the moon and you throw your rock, it's going to go farther. You don't know the context there. In just the same way, if an axe murderer comes to your door, okay, you're in a different context regarding honesty. But as long as you know the range within which your principle holds, that saves you a hell of a lot of time and mental effort. It makes things possible that wouldn't be possible if you had to do every calculation repeatedly, if you had to treat everything case by case. So the fact that you're not omniscient is not a problem. It's still a huge advantage to know that a principle holds within a wide range, even if it doesn't hold in an out-of-context absolute way all the time. Well, if I don't know I can be honest all the time, then it's useless. No, because you still know a huge range within which it holds, and that's extremely valuable. Anyway, that's it for what I had to say about this. Next, I am going to do... Well, I have two people up next. I'm going to do a commentary on a conversation between Raka Ali and Maddox. If you know Maddox, he's basically an integral part of the internet since the late 90s, I guess. And then I'm going to do Armored Skeptic on free will. That's what's coming. So I will see you then.